Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. He's out here in California with me. His name is Clair Burrill. Last name is spelled Burrill. First name Clair, Clair. He's just published a book, March 6th, 2025. The full title is Attorney to the Stars, a Memoir. And it's really interesting. It has a lot of great names that you've probably heard. Maybe you haven't heard, but if you've heard of John Candy, the Rolling Stones, Pat Benatar, and her husband, Phil Giraldo, and Mitzi Shore, and some of the Bill Withers. And you'll see Bill Withers here if you're watching this on Rumble, X, or Rockfin. You'll see his website, which is his full name, author.com. And it is on sale now, and there will be a hardcover that'll be out in about a week. But he can talk more about, we were talking a lot in the pre-show about all the stuff he knows. He can talk more about that. So Clair Burrill, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Bill.
So for people who may not have heard of you, you had a long kind of decades-long career here out in California as an attorney. Maybe you can talk about your background, your law school background. I know you went from Wisconsin to Harvard and then back out to California. Maybe you can talk about that and what led you into kind of becoming an attorney to the stars.
Sure. I can tell you I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin, Plymouth, Wisconsin, small town. I wrote one of the chapters in the book talks about where I came from, a little bit about how I wound up going to Harvard. There's an interesting little twist in there about how the interviews are done and how they select people. I was very fortunate to be and to be accepted into Harvard for the class of 1966. And I also was fortunate enough to go to Harvard on a Navy ROTC scholarship. So after I graduated in 1966, I spent 4 years as a commissioned officer in the United States Navy. There's a chapter in the book about some of my escapades, if you will, while I was in the Navy. Part of what happened in putting all of this together was I consider myself to have, like, when I look back, I have like five basic passions. I have a passion for my wife and my family and so forth, of course. I've always had a very, very eager interest and have participated in the music, presentation, performance of music. So I love music. I put it together with law when I decided to go to law school. I've always liked games and cards. So there's some chapters in the book about my experiences and adventures in all of these areas. And then finally, I took up golf later years. And so there's some golf stories in the book as well. The principal thing about putting the whole book together started when I just started putting down some of my stories for my family. And then that grew into something else, of course.
Right. So you you had actually traveled, like, for a lawyer, you were traveling went to South America, Montevideo, and to kind of other sites. It's pretty cool that you actually had time around to go see the world, right? Before you started practicing.
Yes, my little trip down to South America, which is another, I think, interesting chapter, because I met some very
colorful,
entertaining individuals. And on my trip to South America, what we in the military call a boondoggle, which means you're supposedly going there on a military mission, and it turns out to be quite a nice personal, almost vacation type situation. That's covered in the book, and I think it has some interesting little tidbits in there that make it interesting. Yes, and when I was finally graduated from law school, got my law degree, I took a job with a large law firm in Cleveland, Ohio, and I was comfortable there. But I got back in touch with a classmate of mine from Harvard who had graduated the year before me and gone to law school, and he was working in New York in an entertainment law firm. And he and I had spent 2 years at Harvard playing in a rock band at various locations all over New England. And he went on to follow in the entertainment world. And when I found out that he was transferring out to California to run the California office for the New York law firm, I became interested in possibly joining him. He invited me to do so. I flew to New York. I met everybody, and I left Cleveland with my family, traveled to Southern California, and joined him. His name is Jerry Margolis. There's a couple of chapters in the book about our relationship and our togetherness, if you will, from starting at Harvard as undergraduates and becoming law partners in a law firm, entertainment law firm in Southern California.
Right, but you were kind of located right in the center of things on Sunset Boulevard, so it wasn't kind of. I think you would probably be at the center of the bullseye for a lot of kind of maybe Hollywood things that are going on right next to Beverly Hills, isn't that right? West Hollywood.
Yes, we were right where today West Hollywood meets Beverly Hills, in an office building there, practically in Beverly Hills, right on the edge where they meet. And yes, it was a real significant center of what was going on, if you will, in the entertainment business. And when I joined the firm and came out to California to work with Jerry, he had several clients that were very interesting at the time. And then over the course of 4 or 5 years working together, we built up the practice. And it was very interesting, very challenging. And anyone who reads the book will learn that a lot of these things happened in my life out of coincidence, which was wonderful and fantastic. Some of these things fell into my world, and I started working with some very, very interesting people and on some very challenging endeavors.
Right. I mean, you almost like came out to California, like they say in the law, you put out your shingle or something like that. It had that kind of feeling like, we'll just see what walks in the door today. And that's kind of like what you said happened, right? Like you just picked up different clients.
Absolutely. I mean, the very first chapter talks about one day when I'm sitting in my office, a guy shows up. He has no appointment, but he wants to see a lawyer. Everybody else is at lunch except me and the receptionist. So I say, oh, I'll go out there and see who it is. Well, lo and behold, it turned out to be John Candy.
Amazing. And so you had these relationships with these noted entertainment figures for a long period of time. What was it like meeting and being with John Candy? Unfortunately, he passed away young, right?
Yes, he did. And when he walked into our office looking for legal assistance, he was yet to be really known. He was well known in his home area of Canada, of course, and he had been on a successful Canadian television program called SCTV. And I do have another chapter in the book that talks about how that Canadian group and that Canadian production called SCTV wound up going to late night NBC television. And from there, it sprang into literally careers for a lot of young people who had originally been in the either the Chicago or the Toronto Second City Troupe, SCTV standing for Second City Television. And there's names like Eugene Levy and Catherine O'Hara, John Candy, Martin Short. They all came out of that same SCTV group that I fortunately got to work with very closely because John Candy walked into my office one day.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, yeah, those guys, when I was a kid, I used to watch, they used to have SCTV on after Saturday Night Live. So if you could really stay up late, you could watch that. But yeah, there's all around, like Eugene Levy, like my wife and kid love that one. Was it Schitt's Creek or whatever?
Right.
So they're still around. So that's one instance of your kind of thing. Like you in that neighborhood too, you had a connection to another place that started many people in the entertainment world, the Comedy Store. Can you talk about that?
Yes, this is another situation where I was sitting at my desk and our office manager was tending the phones. Everybody else was at lunch once again. And she burst into my office and said, I just got a call from Mitzi Shore's assistant at the Comedy Store, and Mitzi Shore needs a lawyer. And I was young, inexperienced, didn't know much about Southern California yet. I hadn't been there very long. I hadn't been practicing law in Southern California for a very long time. And I said, okay, well, I know of the Comedy Store, but who's Mitzi Shore? And she said, well, Mitzi Shore is the owner, the operator, the manager. She's the Comedy Store. I mean, she's it. And I said, well, she said, you got to go down there. I told them you're coming. And I just said, okay. So she actually gave me directions on the best way to get there and where to park. I'm talking about the office manager. And when I got there, as I relate in the chapter in the book about my experiences there, is an interesting thing. But coincidentally, while I'm sitting waiting to go and meet Mitzi Shore, who has called and said she needs a lawyer, while I'm sitting there waiting, I'm talking to her receptionist, and the receptionist says, are you from Canada? And I said, no, my accent is actually Wisconsin. And she says, oh, really? Mitzi's from Wisconsin.
Oh, wow.
And I said, what? And she said, yeah, she's from Green Bay, Wisconsin. So when I went into that, what I call the inner sanctum, her office, which was nearly pitch black, very dark, very wide, very long, very large. And here's a little tiny lady, Mitzi Shore. She was petite. And she's sitting behind a big desk, and she asks me to sit down. And I won't spoil the rest of it, but when she found out I was from Wisconsin, we were married.
That was it. Yeah, that's great. And she, she was there for a long period of time. I mean, your relationship with her was a long one, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And one of the things we did was we produced the 20th anniversary, the 25th anniversary, the 30th anniversary of the Comedy Store for HBO. And she would have all of the people who had honed their comedic skills on the stage in the main room of the Comedy Store come back, and they would do it gratis, of course. And we would tape these anniversaries of the Comedy Store in the main room. And it was wonderful going there, sitting with her and watching these things being recorded.
It's incredible. And for people who don't know, the Comedy Store is still around. It's still on Sunset, and it has all the names. It's almost like a living museum in a way.
Yes.
What great names weren't at the Comedy Store. And I think it's kind of like almost like a mecca for all comedians to want to be there.
There's no question about it. It was a springboard, and oftentimes it was a springboard and an entree to the Tonight Show.
Oh, I see.
And that was major for these young people trying to get a break into what they believed was, their career.
Right. So that was it. It was Comedy Show, then the Tonight Show. It's funny, things have changed. I think everybody wants to be on Netflix now or something. But one of those people is Robin Williams, right? Like I'm old enough, I'm 56, I'm old enough to remember the impact of Mork and Mindy. But I mean, it was just, we always waited to have that on, watched every week when it came on TV. But he was another one, right?
Yeah, and here's another coincidental situation. He was a stand-up, doing stand-up in clubs, including the Comedy Store. He was even doing mime on the street corner in San Francisco. He was doing his shtick, if you will, anywhere where anybody would listen. And he had an incredible imagination, a brain that never stopped operating. And when he made his guest appearance on Happy Days, it was because the producer of Happy Days, Gary Marshall, his 6-year-old son came to him one day and said, the show is fine, Dad, but you need a spaceman. So lo and behold, Gary Marshall goes out looking for a spaceman, and he discovers that there's this comedian who performs as Mork from Ork, and he puts him on the show, and the rest is legend. Out of that sprang Mork and Mindy, but it sprang out of a legal wrangling because ABC Television wanted to create a sitcom around Mork, Robin Williams, and he was under contract to George Slaughter Productions to do Laugh In 2. So there was a fight, there was a dispute, and it wound up a legal tangle between ABC Television and George Slaughter Productions. And we got a call from the lawyers for ABC Television, and they said, we have this thing going on. And long story short, they said, there's a comedian stuck in the middle, Robin Williams, and he doesn't have any legal representation. And his career is really in the mix here between these two giants, ABC Television and George Slaughter Productions. And we wound up with Robin Williams as a client as a result.
Wow, that's incredible. Like, you've seen these people at their start too, which is really incredible.
Right from the beginning, Joe.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what a career, like incredible talent. It's not the other one. I mean, that's interesting that because maybe it's because you're a musician, you had a lot of musicians too. Maybe some that I wouldn't expect, like Waylon Jennings, like people in the country world, or even, I don't know how you would typify Bill Withers. I think.
Bill Withers was an incredibly wonderful human being, generous, very articulate, very smart, and very funny. He had a great sense of humor. My father was a punster, and I grew up and became a junior punster, if you will. And Bill Withers was a punster as well. And we used to hit it off, I think partially because of the share of humor. I loved the music and I loved his music. But there's a little clip in the book. I do 2 or 3 chapters about the great, wonderful relationship I had with Bill Withers. And one of the little quips is when he is being deposed in a lawsuit. I won't spoil it, but there's some humor into what happens in that deposition that I think readers will find particularly interesting.
And how did you like run into Waylon Jennings and all these guys out in the Midwest or Central?
Well, what happens is there's like 3 or 4 major areas in the United States that deal with what we call the entertainment business or the entertainment industry. And of course, there's New York and Los Angeles, no doubt whatsoever. You got Detroit with Motown. You had Nashville with country for sure, the major country music area in the country. Florida grew up with a lot of interesting entertainment things that wound up. Now you have Disney all over the place in Florida, but there were other things that sprang up there. But your major, early on, there were like 3, New York, Los Angeles, and Nashville. And then you added Detroit. There was a little bit in Chicago and a little bit in Florida, but those were the major ones. And so if you had an office in New York, you had to do business in Nashville as well as Los Angeles. If you were large enough and good enough and successful enough, you could have an office in all 3 locations. But if you didn't have an office in all 3 locations, you certainly had to spend some time in each of the 3 locations. So we would, from time to time, send somebody to Nashville, even though we didn't have an office there. There would be something that would come up. It might come up through a manager or a record label or some other people who had contact with artists, performers, celebrities in Nashville. And, oh, this guy in Nashville needs a lawyer. Well, boom, get on a plane, go down there, because this is business. This is what you have to do. And that's how we wound up with Waylon Jennings. He was first serviced by my good partner, Jerry Margolis. But then later on, I became more and more involved in his doings and his world and his career, his recording agreements and so forth. And then you will find in one of the chapters in the book, I wind up getting invited to go on tour with him on what was called the Wembley Tour all over Europe.
Oh,
and
wow.
I called myself the 13th member of the band because there actually were 13 of us that wound up on this tour, and it was Waylon and Buck Owens and Tammy Wynette, and then all of their entourage and the band members and so forth. But as far as Waylon's entourage was concerned, there were 12 until I joined. So I became the
Wow.
13th member of the band.
That's amazing. It's amazing. This is like a history book. It's a memoir, but like these are like very well-known people. These are all like superstars that you know from the very beginning. And it wasn't just that, like you added another lawyer to your firm. You said his name was David Braun, but that brought in Bob Dylan, right?
That's correct. David was a very, very successful attorney in New York City who I mentioned in the book literally stumbled into a situation where he wound up at the place where Bob Dylan, when he was young and unknown, was performing in the Village, in Greenwich Village in New York. And long story short, as far as David was concerned, he wound up being Bob Dylan's attorney. And through his relationship with Bob Dylan, he was also the attorney to Neil Diamond, the Jackson Five, and I think Barbra Streisand and several others. And he bounced around a lot because he was very successful, and he didn't stay. I don't know why. I never talked to him about what his personal movings were, but he bounced around a lot and wound up in Southern California, left the law firm he was with in New York, joined a law firm in Southern California, wasn't particularly happy there, and eventually came over and joined us. And that's when I was able to meet actually one of my most admired celebrities, if you will, performers, musician, songwriter, Bob Dylan.
Wow, it's crazy, and I mean, it's amazing. And it's not just the songwriters. You also represented or associated with a very important part of the industry, not the song players, but the songwriters, like the talent. You mentioned somebody who I know, Neil Sedaka, who wrote songs for all these so many famous people.
Right.
Maybe you can talk about him and Ken and Mitzi Welch.
Right. Ken and Mitzi Welch were amazing people. They started out working on early television, wound up meeting Carol Burnett and became responsible for doing all of her shows, setting up the music, setting up the comedy, coordinating it, organizing it. And then they worked with Barry Manilow and a bunch of other people. I got a call one day from their manager, and he said, I have these clients, Ken and Mitzi Welch, and they need an attorney to help them with some things. And I just think you've got the right personality to work with them. And I met them and we hit it off and we became very, very close, both professionally and personally. And there's a chapter in the book about them and some interesting things that happened when my wife and I went to a concert with them in Las Vegas.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. And those people need a lot of contracts. There's a lot of very important business contracts and business negotiations behind the scenes and royalties. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of what it's like to practice as an entertainment lawyer.
Sure. The two principal areas that you work in are negotiation and litigation. And in our firm, we had guys who did more litigation than negotiation and vice versa. I did principally negotiation, but from time to time, depending upon what the matter was or who the client was who was involved in the litigation, I would get involved in litigation as well. And there came a time when I became particularly, I would say, skilled at dealing with copyright infringement lawsuits where songwriter clients of ours, some of their music had been, shall we say, used without permission. And so we go after those people who use copyrighted and protected music without the literally required written license. So if you want to use my song, you have to have a written license from me or from the copyright proprietor if it happens to be somebody other than me. But you have to have a written license in order to use my music. And you won't be surprised. And when you read the book, you'll see time and time again, there are people who just think they can get away with it. They can just copy music or use music and not have to look over their shoulder. But if they're successful in particular, they're going to hear from us.
They're still happening today, Claire. It's still happening.
Absolutely.
Marvin Gaye, I hear stories of all these old classic guys getting lifted, their music lifted, and people making a lot of money off it too. It's not a joke.
No, it's not. And in the age of technology, it is really far, far more complicated today than it was 20 years ago. I mean, once upon a time, the only thing you had to go by to argue that something had been infringed upon, some copyrighted music had been infringed upon, was the so-called deposit copy that you would deposit when you registered the copyright with the United States Copyright Office. Then you advance into sound recordings, and then you advance into now streaming and downloads and ringtones and all of these things. It's far, far more complicated and technical today. I can tell you one little tidbit that is not in the book. I did a copyright litigation infringement case, and we had to have somebody do an analysis of the underlying drum track on this particular recording of a copyrighted musical composition and sound recording. The guy was located in Nashville. We found him, and he called up and said, "This definitely is the same drum track that was taken from your recording and used on their recording, the infringers, the alleged infringers." And he said, I said, "How can you tell it's the same drum track?" And he said, "Because I isolated the drummer's breathing."
Wow.
And there are no two drummers that breathe the same.
Wow.
Unbelievable.
That is unbelievable. But that's what happened. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that happens. It happens also with like a lot of writing too. Scripts get ripped off.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of that stuff going on in the background that may not make it all into the papers or reported on, but that's...
And there's experts who work in this area who their livelihood is based on comparing music. You send them your sound recording and their sound recording, and they do the comparison. Or you send them your musical composition in words and music and lyrics, and they compare it to their music and lyrics. And it's amazing. And oftentimes, if you get into a full-blown trial in a copyright infringement lawsuit, you wind up with several experts on the witness stand on both sides. And it becomes a real interesting back and forth. And it's left up to the jury to decide what really went on here.
Wow, incredible. Can you talk about the record plant and the importance of it in that kind of time frame with the technology like that? Because people today with like home studios may not understand kind of how important some of these brick and mortar recording areas were.
The record plant on 3rd Street in Los Angeles was the place to go to record records for record companies, particularly in the rock area, but in every area, it was the place to go. It was the premier recording studio for many, many, many years. It does not exist today because exactly what you mentioned, Bill, and that is that you can do all of the things you used to be able to do and be required to do in a full-blown engineered recording studio. You don't need all of that anymore. You just don't need that anymore. But there was an era when the only place to record was the record plant. And fortunately, we were the attorneys to the record plant. And I mentioned in a book, a couple of chapters on the record plant, I mentioned loving to go down there and meeting with Chris Stone, who was one of the co-owners and the manager and the business maven of the record plant. I'd find an excuse to go down there because I might bump into Alice Cooper, or I might bump into Leon Russell, or the Rolling Stones, or the Beatles, or you never knew. There was always somebody there recording their latest album.
It's incredible. I think there were only really 4 in all of LA that people preferred. I remember there was one on Wilshire, closer to Santa Monica, that Bob Dylan recorded at. These are no longer functioning, but Sunset Studios or something. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that rings a bell. That rings a bell.
Yeah, there were only a few places. The record plant was
Yeah, the record plant was premier. I mean, everybody said, "Oh, I'm recording at the record plant," of course. And then when some of the big bands started coming out of the San Francisco area, some of the Grateful Dead and some of the others that came out of that in that era, Chris Stone and his partner Gary Kellgren were smart enough. They opened up record plant in Sausalito, California, to service all of those people. I mean, it's just very smart. I mean, if you don't want to have to travel all the way down to Los Angeles, well, we'll put a studio in your backyard.
And I think Fleetwood Mac recorded it that
Yes, they did. Fleetwood Mac was one of the major ones that recorded there. Janis Joplin and several others.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. And you kind of like, I mean, it's kind of like one of the luxuries as a lawyer too. You got to hang out with a lot of these guys in kind of their personal time, play golf, and kind of know. I mean, it becomes a personal relationship, doesn't it?
I was very fortunate in that respect, because I believe there's a lot of lawyers who don't wind up in personal relationships with their clients. But for some reason, I was fortunate to just kind of like, I don't know, meld into their world and exist into the world. And I think one of the reasons, when I look back on it, I think one of the reasons was that I was very, very upfront, straightforward, nothing hidden. I could never possibly imagine being what you would call a yes man. And so even if it was bad news, I shared it with them. And I said, you have to know this. I'm not going to try to butter it up or make it look better. This is where we're at. And here's your alternatives. We can do this or we can do that. But, we got a problem here we have to deal with. And people like you to be straightforward like that. And that develops the personal side of working with these people, I think.
Wow. And you talk about Dupar's, like Dupar's sounds familiar to me as somebody who's lived in LA for 20 years, like driving around and talking with people and car accidents and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's also you to talk about personal life. Like I read about Mick Jagger's, I probably had a lot of these types of suits, but somebody who claimed to be his offspring, right?
Right. There was a woman in Orange County, California, who claimed that Mick Jagger had fathered one of her children. I got involved one day. I got a call, and there's a chapter in the book about this, and I wound up going down there. The major problem was the woman and her attorney were trying to tie up the box office proceeds at a Rolling Stones concert at a venue in Costa Mesa, California. And of course, they were trying to get to money, all right? And they went for what is called a writ of attachment to try to tie up the money at the box office. My job was to go down there and deal with it. And as people will read in the book, they'll find out what happened and how I dealt with it. And of course, how Mick Jagger left without having to do anything further in Costa Mesa, California.
Right. I mean, just the kind of people who need help. It goes all the way up to the present. I see that you kind of interacted with Lady Gaga too. So these aren't just stories from the 70s or 80s.
Yeah, Lady Gaga was one of those people who thought, I think, incorrectly, that using somebody else's music was okay as long as you changed it enough. But she found out that that doesn't work.
Right. Well, you have a lot of stories to tell, a lot of interesting stuff. It's almost like in a history book, like just the amount of people that you knew, such important people. There's more things in the story. You talk about Huey Lewis, other names that people might know, Lena Horne and the Stones and all these other things. I mean, I definitely recommend people check out this book. What anything else you'd like to add or anything I missed before we kind of wrap up the discussion about your book?
No, I think we covered just about everything. I mean, the book is on sale. You can get it on Amazon. You can go to my website at clairburrillauthor.com and take a look at it there. There's some reviews you can take a look at and find out if there's something you might want to pick up and read.
Right, and a lot of stuff. You see the pictures here. There's Clair right there at his desk, looking very loyally. And the book launch was the 13th. So there's a party on the March 23rd. And
That's a book signing at Barnes and Noble in Westlake Village. The launch reference there as 313 is actually, that has happened, of course, and the launch of the hard copy will follow after this March 14 to 18 period. Probably sometime around St. Patrick's Day, the hard copy will be available through my website and also online at Amazon and in your local bookstore.
Excellent. And if people want to reach out to you, Clair, the website's the best place. I see that there's kind of like an email opt-in too and a email address. Is that right?
Well, there's an email address for my publicist. There's of course, I don't think they have it on here, but again, my website is clairburrillauthor.com, and I do not have a problem. Anybody wants to contact me through the website, I'll respond. No problem.
Gotcha. And you do have links to social media, things like that, Facebook, X,
Yes.
and all these other great stories. Like, it's really an amazing book. And thanks so much for your time and congratulations on the book. Again, the author's name is Clair Burrill, Burrill, and the full title of the book is Attorney to the Stars, a Memoir. So thank you so much for your time, Clair.
Thank you, Bill.
All right, stay there. Stay there.